Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay, and I'm going to give just a very quick run through of how I tend to sculpt clouds using FumeFX. And this approach, there's two different ways. There's actually a few different ways we can do it, but one is static. They're just going to be containers of clouds, and the other one will actually be completely dynamic and a fluid, so you can interact with it and move it around. The advantage of sculpting clouds with something like FumeFX for me is actually more of a render time issue, because essentially if you're doing a FumeFX sim over, let's say, using Afterburn, FumeFX would essentially be like doing a level set. You would create the shape and it would generate the efficient amount of voxels to do the job. Whereas if using Afterburn, you're actually layering voxels upon voxels upon voxels upon voxels, and then stepping light rays through it for scattering and all the rematching rendering. So suddenly it becomes a lot slower to deal with. And like recently I worked on one feature film which involved clouds. I was doing a lot of testing for it, and Afterburn was giving great results, but I was getting about 24 hours a frame for the level of quality I wanted. There are other packages out there like TerraGen and Vue and Maya Fluids that are all really good for creating clouds. Max is good for creating clouds too, just it's a matter of kind of picking your battles, and FumeFX I find to be a pretty good solution in general. Plus also, of course, if you want them to actually be fluids, then this is a good step too. Initially, there's a few ways to go about this. I'm just going to be lazy, and I'm just going to create like a standard sphere. I mean, everyone knows how to create a sphere. Now I'm just going to up the segments a lot higher. Now I'm basically going to create a few different shapes that will be kind of like puffs, the same way that Afterburn would be made. So of course I could just add noise and do it that way, and I'm going to get some pretty good results from doing that. But it's not really ideal for what I want to do. What I would prefer would be a displacement map, and we'll just make this spherical mapping since it is a sphere. And I'm just going to go into my material editor. I'm just using the compact one, and I'm just going to assign a shape. Now there's a few different ones in here we could use. Noise is probably what I want to do here. Cellular is also really good, so maybe I'll apply both, and we can just kind of see which one gives the best results. First of all, I'll try cellular. I'm just going to drag this in to the map, instance it. I'm also going to change this to explicit map channel. Very important. The most common thing whenever I deal with materials that people come back about is they're trying to replicate stuff and they have it defaulting on object XYZ. So I want to use a map. That way at least, if I assign this material to the object and show on the viewport, it's actually going to be accurate in the render and everything else. So we can kind of apply the map, figure out a good size to work with. And the other thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to go up here, change my diffuse down to black, which might help here, and put the self-illumination up. I'm going to do this again to both. I'm going to make this explicit map channel as well, and I'm just going to make this black color and self-illumination. Alright, so we have that assigned. Just going to make this appear in my viewport. It seems to be a bit tiny. Actually, one thing I'll need to do, I'm going to apply a UV map and make this spherical, and go to my displace. I'm going to change this to use existing mapping. It's kind of odd. I guess the displacement is overriding it, but anyway, that at least means that the mapping is all applied here, and then the displacement just reads that mapping. So at least that way I'm getting something that's a bit more what I want. So let's do this. Let's plug the cellular map in here, instance it, and let's just bump this up, and we can see that right away we're getting some interesting results. I'm just going to change this to shaded. I'm going to undo what I did here actually. It just depends on some video cards. I get issues with the way it layers the colors in. I'm going to do that to both maps now just to save time. Alright, going back to my cellular. So instantly we've gotten like a, some shape to it. We can make this fractal, and we can bump the variation in a little bit. It's not really going to matter too much, but that's just an interesting way we can get some pattern in there. Same thing if I assign the noise material and plug that into the cellular map instead. We can make this fractal. We've got to bring the size down. But the good thing is we get our high and low values and kind of really sculpt the shape that I want to get out of this. Usually I keep my high very high, so that way there's a lot of white variation, but then I can clamp the black values. Same way I do like a color curve. I'm going to adjust my levels up. We can also do turbulence, but probably not in this case, but turbulence can be useful too. But anyway, I'm just wanting to get like some cloud kind of shapes out of this. And I'm going to go back down, probably to here. I'm just going to apply a X-form modifier, so I can just scale the object a little bit. And I can either put that below the mapping, and that way it's going to apply a spherical mapping to the shape. But what I want to do is just going to get some interesting kind of cloud shapes out of this. Now, one advantage, I'm just going to go back to my cellular and plug that in. I guess we still get the pinching at the top with mapping. If we use object XYZ, I think it does it better. There still is a bit of pinching, but that's something you can keep in mind. But at least with the cellular, I'm getting kind of like very bulbous shapes out of this. And the good thing is now I can actually assign then another displacement to this, use existing mapping, and then plug my noise on top. And that way we get the bulbous shape, and then we can have the other noise patterns on top of here. And I'm just going to go back to my sphere now and adjust my segments to 200, which is the max. And we get some like nice patterns out of this. Now the idea of this, I just want to have like a bit more of a broken up pattern, so that way we have the initial shape and then we also have that. So together we get more of a broken pattern. And of course we can vary this a lot. Alright, so I'm just going to put that, about there. If I want, I can phase through this to kind of find a good pattern that I like. But that's just a good kind of cloud shape to initially start with. I might go into my displace and just actually I just want to kind of break this up a little bit more. And lastly, if I really wanted to, I could go back to my UV map because it's all feeding off of this gizmo. I can get this and I can play with moving the shape around there. So I'm just kind of pointing these out as additional controls so you can kind of like look at the type of shapes that you might want. Again, you might even want to like scale these. Whatever you feel like doing. In fact, I might scale that a little bit. And go to my UV gizmo. And instead of UV, if I wanted, I could do an FFD. And that way I can kind of like really sculpt these shapes into like the pattern that I'm kind of after. Okay. So that's my first cloud shape that I've sculpted. And what I'm going to do, because I'm just building a database of these at this point, so I'm just going to call this prop geo underscore cloud shape 1. And what I'll do next is I'm just going to duplicate this. I could actually just duplicate this a few times. And because they're all based on the same map, I don't want to change any of the displacement. I'd rather change the UVs and how it treats it to kind of really get some different kind of shapes from it. So that way they're all very different. The other thing is I could go back to my radius. I could either do radius or I could do the X form. I want to do the radius because I want to kind of keep the same cloud scale, but the actual shape and size of this can vary. So this one could be a lot tinier, or I can make this like a lot bigger. I'm just going to make this a bit tinier. I'm going to go to my FFD and turn that off. And create a new one. And again, we want to make this kind of a bit more flat. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that essentially going to use this as a distribution system with particles. So the only thing is that if you're doing really long stuff, you just want to make sure that we're distributing the orientation only horizontally. Otherwise, it's going to look a bit odd. But that's what we're doing anyway. But it's just good to keep that in mind. Alright, so I'm just getting some different shapes from this that I want to do. Same deal again. This one, I'm going to turn my FFD off. I might make this slightly bigger. Apply a new FFD. Again, just going for different shapes. And I'll get my UV map. I'm just going to move this around, just going to change the shape. Alright, that's good. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to do 3 shapes. That should be fine. And again, I could totally play with this more and do different things. I just want to kind of have this as a base. I'm just going to rename these to Cloud Shape 2, Cloud Shape 3. Okay. Now we have those. The next thing I want to do is I want to start to sculpt up a distribution mesh. So this again is the same kind of deal. What I might do, I might just make a box for this. And let's give this some segments. And I'm going to do an FFD and also a noise. So the FFD, basically this is going to be like a mesh I'm going to use to drive like particles through it. So I just want to like scale, like move this into just a more of an organic shape. And and I'm just going to select the top ones here and deselect them in this view. Push that out. And at this stage, I'm just going to apply the noise, and that will kind of help break this up more. Now you can make this mesh however you want, and we could change it later if we need to. I just want to have something to start with. Okay. Now, for the time being, these objects, I don't want to use them in the detail they are right now because they're kind of dense. So all these are called prop geo blah blah blah. I'm just going to write a really quick script. And this is just literally just dollars prop geo cloud shape star. Okay, so I'm just going to call this cloud group equals as array. And that's just going to put all the objects into that group. So then if I want to, I could just say like select cloud group and run that bit. It's going to select them. So that's the easiest way for me to do like cloud group dot segments equals let's say 25, and that way I can just drop the resolution quickly. I'm just doing that because I just don't want to individually have to go back and forth a lot. So now that's done, I'm going to load a particle flow. I'm just going to free up some space here, and I'm going to create an empty flow, a birth operator, a position object. Add this as the position object, change it to volume, emit, let's say 50 particles to start with, plug this in, 50 particles at frame 0 and only frame 0. Lastly, PF source, I'm going to rename this to, PFS cloud distrib, or let's just say clouds, that'll do. Make this viewport 100%. Change this to geometry, and we'll go for a bit more of an interesting color. Okay, so right now there is no geometry, so coming up as ticks, so let's add in shape instance, and we can just select all three of these. Actually we'll go tools, or group, I guess it is these days, and we'll call this cloud shape group. And the advantage of that too is that I can still change the segments now without having to go ungroup them each time. So you can say 25. And so I could just say cloud res equals 25, and then cloud res. And that way I could change this to 200. I could change it to 20. So it's just an easy way to do that. Okay, so now I'm just going to select the group, choose group members. Now I'm just going to hide this mesh for the time being, and we can see that they're all created and they're all the individual shapes. So I'm going to add now in a scale, so I can change the scale of this so it varies. I'm going to change the bias to centered, and that way it's just going to go up and down instead of more leaning towards up, which is by default. And you go to rotation, and we can see that these are now orientated all weirdly. Like I mentioned, we want to make these orientate only in random horizontal. That means they'll twist around the x-axis, but that's it. So now we've done that, I'm just going to up this to maybe 150 particles so we get a bit more of an interesting shape. Alright, so technically I think that's probably going to be too much because I don't want to go overboard with this. I unhid my distribution mesh, and that's just because let's just experiment a little bit with randomizing the shape of this if we wanted to, so that way we can just get some different shapes from it. But basically that's our cloud shape. Now I can do multiple ones very easily with the system where literally I could just have different cloud shapes. for example. It's very easy to sculpt that. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Now, again, I just want to do this as a quick example, but next what I'll do is I'm just going to go in FumeFX, object source, drag this out, create a container, surround the cloud, we'll go in here and I'm just going to add my object source, and one step we need to do now, I'm just going to do it lazy, but mesher, you can find that in compound objects. I just did that because I don't want to drag it out and have to center it, so just typing mesher, close brackets, that's just going to create it at 0, 0, 0 in world space. So I'm just doing that to save a bit of time. So I select my mesher, I'm just going to call this mesher clouds. That'll do. And I'm going to plug that in here to the particle system. And I'm going to go into Fume and add our mesher clouds in there. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. Add it in here, mesher clouds. Alright, so let's just run a sim and see how this looks. First of all, the detail's all wrong, but that's fine for now. So by default, it's emitting, doing its thing. Obviously it's fire, a lot of other stuff, so let's just disable fuel. It's still going to come out wrong, but there we have our initial shape. So I'm just going to add in a light and a few other things to get the ball rolling. So I'm just adding a quick light, make a cast a shadow, do a ray traced atmosphere shadows onto shadow parameters, and add that in. Rendering tab, I'm just going to change my color so that way it's not a bright white. And we could also look at if we wanted to preview using GPU so that we get some self-shadowing. Sorry, in here, shadows. I might turn that off though. Personally, I don't have the most success with it. I'm going to change the resolution now to something a bit higher. That'll do for now. I'm going to go much higher after that. But here we can see we have it emitting. I'm going to go to rendering tab. Let's turn on shadows here as well. Alright, so it's looking good. I'm just going to move my light a little bit over here. And let's get the ambient color, punch it up a little bit, make it more of a sky color. So already we're starting to see some cool clouds. Only problem is that they're moving the whole time. They keep emitting. It's not really what we're after. I'm just going to change this a little bit. Okay, so let's disable that, and I'll set this at 3. And we have our visual fall off we can play with too. Actually keep it pretty much the same. Okay, so a couple things. First of all, object source, we're going to go in here. We want to disable the extra value, because what that's going to do is based on the normals, it's going to emit outward. We don't really want that. This here is more the jittering, so we can have that. This isn't moving, so the object value shouldn't really matter. I'm going to disable temperature altogether. and this will help a little bit with keeping it static. I still need to go in here. Because there's no temperature, technically it shouldn't be moving. So it's pretty good. There's a bit of moving in there just because it's continuing to emit. So the next step would be that I want to animate this to emit for 2 frames, or let's say 5 frames, and I'm going to set the smoke value to 0. And this means it's initially going to create for a few frames, and then it's going to stop. The other thing is that the smoke dies out, so we're going to go to smoke dissipation and set the strength to 0. And we'll set this to 0, 0, 0 pretty much. Still tends to die out a little bit. That's fine. Because what we're going to do, at least at this point, is we're just looking for a static frame to work from. So it isn't that big a deal, but we will kind of revisit that later. So I'm just going to delete that one keyframe off of the emitter so it continues to emit forever. Now I'm going to go back to this script. I'm going to change this to 200, run it, and that we're going to deal with a really dense mesh. Okay. We're also going to go back into Fume. I'm going to change the resolution of that to really dense as well. Might be good to save your work. Now, a couple of things. Like I said, at this point we're just going to use a static frame, so that's fine. I'm going to go to Simulation tab. It's moving a lot slower now because the detail. I'm going to set the time scale down a little bit. I'm going to give this a little bit of turbulence. In fact, I'm tempted. I might turn off my particle system for a second because it's going to be a lot quicker then. Alright, so give this a little bit of turbulence because I'm just going to choose a static frame, set the scale pretty low, give it some time there, detail there. Maybe a little bit of diffusion. This is not so defined. Actually, in the smoke. Alright, so that should be good. I'm just going to change my advection to advanced. Okay, and I think we're good to go. So, other thing I'm going to do is set my resolution much higher. Because I'm just going to set like 20 frames. The next step, actually, I'm going to jump ahead just for the sake of it automatically being working. We're just going to sim for 20 frames, and I'm going to make this go to like 19, start frame 19. Not that that matters, but I'm going to set this to start frame. Actually, oh yeah, so I'm going to set this all to 19 and just choose start frame and end frame, and that way it's just going to pick one frame. Alright, I'm going to turn my particles on, and let's run the sim. Alright, so that finished the simulation. I'm just going to hide this group so we just have our container. And as we can see, if we go to any frame, it's just going to be a static mesh. Okay, so basically we can see that if I render this out, we have some cool clouds. Obviously lighting and shading we'd need to play with, but instantly we're getting some really cool results. I can go back to the rendering tab. Let's just do a bit of playing around here. We could turn on the color ramp and play with this a little bit if we wanted to. There's a few options in there. Personally, for this sort of thing, I'm probably not going to use the color ramp. It's kind of weird there's such a fall off. In the object emitter, I'm just curious. Yeah, it's kind of weird. There shouldn't be any fall off, but that's fine. So here I'm just going to go into illumination. This is going to slow things down, but let's give it a shot, because this is essential for clouds, is to have scattering inside of it. Obviously it's a little slow, but we can play with that a little bit. I'd say maybe because we are doing static stuff, that it might be worthwhile, playing with your extra value to make it kind of blow out a little bit, but I do like having some definition. So that's one thing to kind of play with a little bit. It's just kind of finding that ultimate definition that you like. But other than that, I just wanted to kind of point out that, yeah, it is kind of hollow inside, which is kind of odd. But that should be fine. So I'm just going to lastly go into my environment panel and set up a sky color that's a little bit brighter. But this is just a quick way that we're able to sculpt some nice looking clouds that are based on the shape that we actually create. So we can create different shapes, different definitions, and get some pretty cool results from it. I'm just going to get my color here and bring this up a little bit. Alright, so again, we need to play with the direction of lighting and all that sort of stuff, but ultimately this is pretty cool. The other good thing about this, I'm just going to find out where my light is, I'm just going to lower that. The other good thing is that this is all clonable, so I could then create secondary containers. If I wanted to as well. So you could actually build up like libraries of cloud containers and then use them to build up an even bigger cloud system, if you get what I'm getting at here. And that means that we could have like 50 or 20 containers of clouds, and this is how on some recent projects I've been developing a lot of skies very easily. And lastly, I just turn on show channels, set this pretty low, like 15, enable. It's odd. Oh, duh. Maybe that's not a good idea. And I'm just doing this again. Yeah, always be careful, never show in viewport with that set as 1. It does not like that. So let's just set as 15, show smoke. Alright, so anyway, just the idea is that way I can quickly see these additional containers and move them more into the shape. But the whole idea is just that way we can kind of build an extension of what we had. So again, as you can see, just like layering out these additional containers, I'll get rid of them real quick. I'm just going to focus on this main container. I just want render times to be quick because I should be at the pub right now and need to get this done. So yeah, basically, we were able to get some cool kind of results from this. And again, just like developing different shapes, you can get a lot of different cool stuff from it. So it's just a matter of kind of defining the shapes of geometry and then getting that to then turn into a cloud. So that's kind of like why I think it's really fast at rendering, and you get some like really cool results from it. And the approach for doing fluid-based clouds is exactly the same, just essentially, we're going to be doing things a little bit different, but for the most part, it's the same idea. It's just more locking it to be static and then kind of taking it from there to a fluid form. Alright, so if we were to quickly do that, basically it's the same thing, just a little bit different. What we would do, and again, while we're doing this, I'm just going to drop the resolution down on my clouds. I had this just crash, so I don't actually have that. You know what? It might just be easier to write that again. what are they called? It's alright. So we'll be generating from the same geometry, doing all that, plugging the mesher in. Everything's exactly the same. I'm just going to change a few things. First of all, I would kind of want to get it to the frame that I wanted. So let's say frame 19 or whatever. And then I'd want to kind of just animate it all to stop for a second and then kill a lot of attributes. So at this frame, I'm just going to go in and kind of timestamp my turbulence to where it is. Velocity dampening, I'm going to do that. Just make sure that, yeah, it's reading. Time scale. Those are the main things. And yeah, so that should be fine. I'm going to go one more frame ahead. And just in here, I'm going to delete the first keyframe on a lot of these. I just wanted the time scale to be low, and then what I'm going to do is the next frame, I'm going to set this to be extremely low, and I'm also going to set the vorticity dampening to be extremely high, like a value of 1. And the turbulence I'm going to set to 0, although like you can reintroduce that later. The whole idea is just to kind of like stop it for a few frames, and then I'll reintroduce the time scale back to 0.7, I think it was, and this back to 0, and I'll keep the turbulence off for now. So all of these, I'm just going to set them to be linear frames, and I'm also going to then get this keyframe and duplicate it over here, so that way it just stays for a few frames where it should be. Alright, so the whole idea is maybe before frame 25 we want to generate this, and then we're going to play we do simulations from there for our actual shot. So this would just be like we'd pre-roll it basically. Alright, so that being said, what I'll do now is I'm going to create let's make it a more interesting shape. Let's get a torus knot. And I'm just going to center this. I'm just going to animate this moving through and rotating. Okay. And I don't want this to touch the cloud. In fact, I want to make this start as if the animation was starting at frame 25. I'm going to make this start here. And I'll make it move through it pretty quick. Lastly, because this is being pushed down, I'll give it a bit more vertical space. And not that I really want to art direct this too much, I'm just going to bring the rotation down a little bit so it doesn't move extremely fast. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to go into Fume. A few things I'm going to set up. I'm going to set this to sim for 100 frames, and I set the playback start there, oops, there, and turn all this stuff off. Object source, I'm going to add this in, and I set this to be about 0.7. Okay. The other thing I could do with this is I could actually have a system move through that has temperature, and that could affect it as well. But this is fine for now. Basically, it's going to animate all the stuff off, and then what I could do later is reintroduce the turbulence as this comes through. So I can get this, and I could watch and say, okay, around here it's going to begin to affect it. So maybe at that frame, I get my turbulence, which I'm just going to adjust this value. And I'm going to add another keyframe where we bring it back, but not as much, over time. And that'll be useful just because it means it'll kind of all turb up. And we can kind of localize that if we wanted. I'm just going to save this as fluid. And let's run the simulation and see what happens. So I'm just going to turn my particles back on. Set this to 200. Alright. I'm going to adjust that to 250 for the height. Again, this is getting really slow. This isn't the fastest machine either, but it's pretty quick. Alright, the other thing I'm going to do, I might just turn spacing off. Sorry, I'm going to turn the particle system off for a second, just so this is quicker. And I might also just in here change this to dots, because the mesher will still read. Now I'm going to set the resolution to be maybe there. I don't want to have it as high as before, just because I just want to do this as an example, but I'll save this, turn my particle system on, let's run the simulation and see how it looks. Alright, so here's the finished simulation, and as we can see, we have a fluid container. Obviously the turbulence kicks in at a certain value, so it starts to be disturbed. That's up to you if you want to do that, but as we can see, we have a cloud, and then it's able to get fully interactively affected. So again, if we wanted to, we go objects as well, and that way we should be able to see the object move through it. But that sort of thing is really useful because obviously now not only have we sculpted clouds, but we're able to actually move objects through it, causing there to be effect. Alright, so as we can see, clouds now being disturbed. Again, I could try something different. I could make it move through it and stir it around more, but as we can see, we were able to sculpt realistic cloud. And not only that, but then once we sculpted it, initially it's accurate to exactly the shape that we created. Okay, but then not only that, but it's a fluid, so we're able to then move objects through it and get a fluid reaction, which is really useful. Alright, so that's it. Again, just a quick example, but hopefully something that a lot of people can use. I already use this a lot just for sculpting a lot of 3D clouds. Like I said, if I actually render this out, we'll check what the render times are, but you know, I could easily get a higher resolution than this, but this is still pretty decent, and simulating it's a couple of minutes. Okay, and then rendering it is, let's see, 14 seconds. Opposed to a couple of hours per frame when we're dealing with you know, Afterburn or other, you know, solutions. And again, we can still turn on scattering, bring this down, adjust this a little bit, but you know, we could add scattering, other things to it if we wanted to, just to kind of play with that concept. But already, like, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. And again, the whole idea is that not only that, but it is a fluid. So if you want to have like a dragon or something like fly through it and actually have it affect it, a plane, whatever it would be, we can do that, and it actually simulates and we get fluid motion, which works out really well. And the fact that we can also sculpt it, that's a little too intense, but the fact that we can also sculpt it also works out really well, just because it means that we can get specifically what we want from the geometry. We can model exactly the geometry we wanted, and once we are 100% ready to use it for fluids, we can transfer it over, then render in Krakatoa or however we want to use it. Krakatoa would render it faster, and yeah, the whole point is that, you know, we can get accuracy from that and then plug it into what we're doing, and we get some pretty cool results from doing that. Alright, so hopefully everyone, or some of you, found this useful for what you're doing. And if you have any questions, you can visit my website, allanmckay.com, and I got plenty more stuff up there and constantly updating it. So take a look when you get a chance. But either way, this is just a quick example of how to build realistic clouds that we can duplicate and build libraries of, or in fact use them to build fluid simulations that are interactive. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed that.